started getting involved in musical instruments when I was a little critter of about 5, but eventually evolved in guitars out of curiosity because I'm a hands-on type of guy, and I found one in the garbage one day and I figured, oh, maybe I could put this thing together. Didn't even play it, but I gave it to somebody and they said, oh, it works great. And that was my first introduction to guitars. A little later on, I did take an interest in it, and I went as far as getting involved as teaching basic guitar and stuff like that. I needed another guitar while I was teaching because my good guitar was getting totally trashed. So I said, okay, now I'll build one. This was while I was going to university, and I had absolutely no tools. And my first guitar was made with rubber bands, bricks, and a lot of sandpaper, and no knowledge whatsoever. From there, I kept building, and I built about 15 of them before I decided, well, I really like this, and I think I'm going to start building guitars professionally. I eventually moved to New York, set up my shop on Carmine Street, which was, at that time, Lucien Barnes's shop, Lucien Barnes IV, who was the apprentice to Jose Rubio, and the shop belonged to Rubio before Lucien. So it had a lot of history, and it was great karma. It was an interesting era, the 60s, the early 60s and later on. On the block, there were lots of wonderful musicians at the time. John Sebastian was a neighbor, the Mothers were neighbors, Richie Havens, Bob Dylan down the block. I mean, I can go down a list a mile long. So I got involved in building steel string guitars, and it just kept growing. I started training people, and this is after I had built about 175 classics and about 75 lutes for the Manor School of Music, Juilliard. We moved the shop eventually to Grand Street, where we kept growing. Lots of musicians visited, and had some funny instances going on there. But we did get to a point where we had to move, and we moved to New Hampshire, where we had a 35,000-foot facility and built Gurian guitars. We were also supplying the industry with wood. We had set up a sawmill. We had a mail order company and all of that good stuff. And in 1979, the shop burned down. We rebuilt it and was up and running in 6 months after the fire, but there was a series of problems between the economics of the time and me getting into an accident with the softball team, breaking my ankle and having complications that created a terrible mess. And I closed the shop in 1982 and relatively stayed dormant for a few years, just built some of the parts for the industry, like fret files and so on, and then I got started building decorative wood inlay and parts for the industry. Here's one that a lot of people would like to know how I do. This is for a banjo, old master tone banjo. Got a stash here, this guy. We made all this stuff this week? My God. That's a pretty one. This is for a banjo, an old-timey banjo. Here's a block for diamonds. At that point, there was nowhere I could go. That was the dot-com era, and every place was rented. There was no space in Seattle, and I did want to stay here. I had gone through 2 earthquakes in Seattle already, one of which was pretty radical in Pioneer Square, and I said, well, I like the water. I have a little buffeting here if I buy a barge and build a building, and that's what I did, and here I am today. We have about 10,000 feet on the water. We have a great bunch of people working here. We love the area and love the people in Seattle. So this is the only flotilla in the music industry that manufactures parts. Yeah, it's got to cook overnight. It's too wet. Yeah, it's got to go back in. This is what he's cutting now. We moved onto the barge with literally not much, but it was all wired and ready to go, and we were actually up and running a week after we moved everything on. So we lost a week. But the windows weren't even in. It was crazy, but it was fun. Yeah. This is Mr. Duke. The barge mascot. If we had sails and a skull and crossbones on top, he'd be right in keeping, I guess. Duke is only 8 years old. He's a little guy. And still being a pain. What are you looking at? Come on. Want to eat the camera? He's a rare bird. The shop is divided into old world and new world. So we have a lot of modern equipment like CNCs and lasers and automatic equipment. The old world, it's just old-timey band saws and table saws and presses and things like that. We have capabilities of carving guitar tops, necks, and cutting shell. We built a CNC machine specifically for cutting shell. It does 4 cuts at a time. Then we do the decorative wood inlay. We can do pretty much anything, and we do make 1 million bridge pins. Actually 1,600,000 bridge pins a year, if you could believe that, and that's in wood and bone and ivory, mammoth ivory. Legal stuff. All legal. Well, I'm setting up a shop at my house. Yeah. I'm getting there. Who knows, another 10 or 20 years maybe. I'll start building again. I got a lot of people asking me to build. So maybe I will.